me here, these people here now, we don't have this 20,000 years ago with these kind of people. This is, the hieroglyphs are completely unknown, unacceptable by any legitimate academic standard. And is my English correct? Yeah, it's completely false, I must say. I would like to lend some credit here to the people over there in America, but it is not something that we can give the credit to. We must give the credit for where it is due, yeah, and it is absolutely unfounded. You can take my word for this. Dankeschön.
According to current archaeological theory, North and South America never saw a human footprint or felt the hand of man on its perfect harmony until very recent times. For millions of years, one half of the planet Earth was completely devoid of human life. Flora and fauna in the Western Hemisphere flourished and perished, evolved and extincted, in a flow of life controlled only by natural acts, cosmic calamities, or the benign neglect of the otherwise occupied mind of God. Meanwhile, the other side of the planet was a hotbed of primate evolution. 12,000 miles and half a planet's distance away from Camano Island, in the land now called Africa, the human species stumbled into existence, scientists say, over 2 million years ago. These humans were pretty successful survivors in the game of life. They were warm-blooded, and that gave them control of their environment. They were good parents, and that allowed them to construct a complex social structure. They were smart. This branch of the human tree was not the only experiment involving primates. Two-legged mammals of all kinds popped up. Some prevailed, some faltered. Many human-like groups flourished, only to disappear into extinction. Eventually, the most successful, a scrappy brand of primates now called Homo sapiens, found themselves dominant and utterly in charge. Before you knew it, this clever new species was starting to make their mark on this planet they found themselves inhabiting. They discovered that they could utilize objects in their world that other mammals simply coexisted with, like stones and sticks and sound-making instruments. They made tools. They used the tools to make art and weapons, and they started to change the planet to suit their needs. They formed communities that worked together. They invented the dreaded ceremony called a meeting. They also invented a group of gestures and noises and warnings that their group understood. These became a language that would bond them further to their group. Early humans spent much of their lives in fear. They worshipped or fled from forces they didn't understand. They learned to hunt in packs. These hunting packs would fight to protect the tribe from other tribes' hunting packs, which they called armies. They discovered fire and made tools from rocks that melted in that fire. Now they made even more efficient killing groups. They learned the meaning of love. And with it, the pain of betrayal. And they surprised themselves in their delight in art and music. This new species, man, prospered and struck a balance with the planet. It was an experiment in genetics that seemed to be working well. The humans spent the next 1 million years moving around to anywhere they wanted to go on this half of the Earth. Meanwhile, according to today's science, there was this huge mass of land, rivers, lakes, mountains, jungles, and deserts that the human race had no knowledge of or contact with. North and South America, thousands of ocean-wide miles away, just cooked and bubbled with its own brand of humanless evolution, like a giant, unattended, self-sustaining zoo. Only recently, according to accepted scientific theory, and I mean very recently, has the animal known as Homo sapiens found their way to the other side of the planet. Changes in ocean levels and polar ice masses between what is now known as Alaska and the easternmost tip of Siberia apparently caused a land bridge to link the two sides of the world for, in Earth terms, a very short time. Most accepted theories of civilization spread say that this land bridge opened up on the few occasions that great waves of glacial ice spread across the planet's northern half like a giant, mile-high, slowly southward moving slab of cheese. These first visitors to the Western Hemisphere didn't leave many traces of their journey southward from the Arctic Circle. In order to understand what happened, present-day science has had to guess at their progress as they traveled on foot to the south. Archaeologists base their conclusions on artifacts that they find today. Until recently, the oldest objects found in North America were spear points and stone tools and weapons, which seem to date to from 9,000 to 11,000 years ago. Since a lot of the first spear point evidence turned up near the area called Clovis in New Mexico, the first human North American migration has been referred to as the Clovis Point culture. After 1 million or 2 years of human habitation, the first side of the planet was becoming a familiar neighborhood. Groups of like-minded people, as they were beginning to think of themselves, formed nests of dwellings where there was safety and diversity and a common interest. This was the beginning of a way of life for the humans on the planet Earth. They called it civilization. Civilizations were settlements where different people had different skills and worked together as a group. These social structures took thousands of years to get sorted out. On the old side of the Earth, civilizations popped up all over the place. Some grew mighty, some blossomed, then faltered. Some societies tried to conquer every other civilization they could find. Some others preferred to become isolated and self-contained. During this dawning of mankind, the polar ice cap was growing and shrinking in 20,000-year cycles. Trees, vegetation, and animal populations always came back as the ice sheets melted northward, only to be scraped away in the next ice advance 20,000 years down the road. With the melting of the last great ice sheet, the ocean level rose over 80 feet, leaving North and South America once again separated and unreachable. Science says that the few visitors to this side of the planet, after a many thousand-mile walk during really lousy weather, were now marooned in this natural paradise. A Garden of Eden, one half a world wide. With nothing to do but hang out, the small bands lived the good life in a land of plenty. Strangers in a fertile paradise. On the first side of the earth, the old side, business was booming. Cities were being invented, mathematics was discovered, languages proliferated, and technology, metallurgy, and navigation were changing everything.
There is power enough to seize or destroy the world. And only I know how to release and control it.
Humans were worshiping everything in sight. Whatever they didn't understand was either feared or kissed up to. Organized religions grew rapidly in this environment. Many cultures slowly assembled fables, dire warning lessons, and social suggestions, and spun them into a long pseudo-historical text, which used the promise of life after death to get their populations to behave. It worked really, really well. The old world, therefore, was rich in history, discovery, invention, and enjoyed a million-year heritage of stories and beliefs. The New World had a few ragtag bands of risk-takers from Siberia wandering around in a virgin ecosystem. There's a popular archaeological viewpoint which is based on this premise. It suggests that the few humans stranded in the Western Hemisphere by the melting of the last great ice sheet weren't in any great rush to form technically interesting civilizations until pretty recent times. They didn't have to. Life was good. There were no neighbors and the drinks were free.
The Clovis Point people model has been accepted by scientists for 50 years. It places a date for the first North American visitors at 11,000 years ago. The Clovis Point theory suggests that organized human behavior never occurred in North or South America until well after the beginning of the last ice age. But there is ascension in the archaeological ranks. Recent discoveries and subsequent research are tearing this theory all to hell. Science, for all its brilliance and innovation, does not take kindly to change. In the last 20 years of the 20th century, new finds suggesting a much earlier migration into South America, Mexico, and the Pacific Northwest have threatened the very roots of our assumptions about the dawn of culture on this planet. With each new find, the dates of human habitation in North and South America are pushed further and further back. In fact, the objects on Earth on a little island in Puget Sound, in Washington State, are causing a rethinking of the entire story of humankind. The discovery of the Mount Vernon culture could change everything.
The discovery of odd things has always been a part of life in the Pacific Northwest. Northwest natives have many stories about the first people. Native American folk tales list the great accomplishments of a group of powerful and wise ancestors and animals who took part in the creation of the world. These narratives remain in the contemporary Native American belief system even today. When explorers from Europe first laid eyes on Puget Sound 500 years ago, everything must have seemed amazing. Huge, ancient trees must have suggested to the visitors a place of legend, a land of giants, a place with a past. As pioneers flooded into these mythical Native American lands from all over the United States, they discovered many artifacts which suggest a very ancient history. But life was usually too precarious in the early settlers' world to worry about ancient artifacts and their meaning.
Artifacts suggesting sea forms and black ravens are found at just about any excavation site in the Pacific Northwest. Hell, you couldn't dig an outhouse pit without turning up some pieces of old pottery.
Many pioneer homes had a collection of these ceramics. They were assumed to be Native American. Local tribes would refer to them as the Ancient Ones. They ended up on pioneer shelves with more recent artifacts, more clearly linked to the local people. The first change in understanding came when a local artist antique collector began assembling a collection of the pottery found on or near Camano Island where he lived. He called them his Camano Folk Art Study Project and kept an eye out for local examples.
A breakthrough came in 1995 when a local landscape designer and art dealer found a huge cache of shards and evidence of an early settlement while rearranging a new crop of trees from the Kubota garden collection. For Jack Gunter, it was a discovery that would change his life.
Within weeks, Gunter had found evidence of a compound, 4 building foundations and a temple-like structure leading to a door, 7 feet under the soil of Camano Island. Fearing the destruction of the site that crowds of curious onlookers would wreak, and lacking the necessary permits, Gunter worked at night for 3 cold, wet Pacific Northwest seasons.
Now that the Camano Island excavation is complete, it's safe to allow ourselves to draw some conclusions about what we found here. These results are going to run contrary to the mainstream of accepted archaeological beliefs.
Ja, wir hier in Tübingen und I think the main interest for the people here is this question about these people in the Northwest America about the archaeological finds which we here in Germany and Europe, I might say also, excuse my English, is okay. Yeah. We do not believe what we are hearing. Now here we have some unfounded claims about these early people from 200,000 Jahre wie sagen Sie, how do you say the 20,000 years. These people, they are playing golf, I don't know. We can't understand how this can be some legitimate idea, the society here for the archaeological foundation in Essen is not credible. And it makes me so angry to find colleagues in Estados Unidos, how do you say, finding the wrong thing and making these false statements.
What have we found here? Is it really evidence of an ancient civilization? in North America? Is it possible that more than just a nomadic culture lived here 12,000 years ago? If they were so advanced, how come we haven't found evidence of their cities here in the Pacific Northwest? To try to answer anything, we have to look at the Rocky Point artifacts a little closer. A clue is found in a story about a flood.
The story of a catastrophic flood is common to many cultural folk histories. The Camino excavation contains 7 such narratives, each one etched and pierced and underglazed onto large ceramic jars that, when intact, obviously serve the purpose of recording local tales and histories.
Clearly visible on all of these narrative jars is the shape of a large boat. Its significance was not immediately obvious. Fortunately, there are clues on each of these pots that, when taken together, reveal the reason for this obsession with a boat. A boat with ties to the ice. A boat with a connection to something very nasty that happened a long time ago. Something awesome enough to create a legend.
A lot of the land features in the Pacific Northwest are determined by the ebb and flow of giant blankets of ice. All of the valleys up here in the North Cascades have this shape. It's a hollow trough caused by 5,000 feet of slowly moving solid ice. This is the Kent Valley, south of Seattle. 12,000 years ago, 1/10 of all the water on the planet sat frozen right over there. And it was melting. 10,000 years ago, the Kent Valley was a river, 15 miles wide and 20 feet deep in the summer, as the ice sheet turned to water miles from the sea. Many huge rivers found their way to the Pacific Ocean in the days of the Great Melt-Off. Big, fat torrents of water were everywhere, headed for the shoreline. Hills like these appeared as little islands in a continually flowing sea. But things would be brewing in a distant mountain pass that would change the face of this region for years to come, and maybe launch 1,000 legends told all around the world.
As the Great Wall of Ice that stretched north for 6,000 miles began to melt back, billions of tons of water flowed into the Pacific Ocean. The main channel for much of the Pacific Northwest runoff was the valley now occupied by the Columbia River. Meltwater easily flowed into the low basins, therefore found the sea, except for one exit. A steep-walled canyon near what is now called Missoula, Montana, somehow remained unaffected by the rapid melting that the climate was causing. A body of water built up as the ice receded behind it. It filled an area now known as western Montana. At one point, this artificial lake was as large as Lake Michigan today. The water continued to build up behind the ice dam. Lake Missoula as it is now called, got deeper and bigger and was about to meet the sea all at once. Physical landscape features in eastern Washington suggest that 10,560 years ago, the dam gave way. 75 billion gallons of glacial melt barreled across the Pacific Northwest prairie east of the Cascade Range. It was over in an hour. Scientists estimate that a wall of water 500 feet high roared toward the Columbia Basin at speeds of 75 miles an hour. Huge holes were gouged out of solid land where the eddies swirled. The topsoil was ripped away to bedrock for hundreds of square miles. Even now, the area called Scablands is living, or should we say non-living, testament to this truly terrible day. Did anyone survive? Certainly no one in its path. Perhaps some berry pickers on a high plateau were saved. While the world they knew was destroyed by a terrible wall of churning foam and debris. Did they watch their animals get swept away? Did they wish they'd listened to those whiners out by Coeur d'Alene when they complained a few months back about that leaky, melting dam of ice upriver? They'd said, "You better build a boat if you want to live down there." Is this the calamity that caused the Noah legend?
The Northwest is filled with monuments to a great ark. People still worship in them just south of the Mount Baker Range. There is a growing body of evidence that suggests the story of Noah and his ark had its roots in the Pacific Northwest. Many attempts to locate the remains of this legendary vessel on the snowy sides of Turkey's Mount Ararat have met with failure. Perhaps they should look instead at Mount Baker.
Ten objects from the Camano Island site suggest a level of science and mass sophistication unheard of in these ancient times. Of the reconstructed artifacts, one pot stood alone in color, texture, and shape. It was a gruby green-colored cylinder, decorated with a regular pattern of square holes and raised blocks. Were these features purely decorative, or did they imply some kind of language or counting system? Archaeologists have known for some time about a system of communication that the Inca civilization used in the ancient times before the Spanish conquest in the 1600s. It consisted of an ordered sequence of knots tied in a series of parallel strings. These sets of knots were called kipa by the ancient people whose kingdoms stretched across the backbone of the rugged Andes Mountains 400 to 800 years ago. Examples are still available from high-level antiquities dealers, but they are rare. By carefully noticing the placement of the knots and their relationship to the knots near them in neighboring strings, a casual reader could, 7 centuries ago, understand the weaver's message. Kipa writing utilized mathematics and craft to convey information much like the high-speed computers of today. They were the invoices and the newspapers and the libraries of the Inca society. There was even a special set of knots which were understood only by the privileged few. High priests and politicians of the day could pass coded messages without fear of translation. It was an early form of what we now know as encryption. When the green Camino pot design was visually unraveled into what archaeologists call a rollout, the design looked very similar to knots in a chain of 15 string. There was clearly information in this decoration, but what did it signify? Within days of the green pot's discovery, a computer software analyst interpreted the series of bumps and holes. The pattern was a binary code, the simplest mathematical counting system in the universe. This strange green vessel had more secrets to reveal. The numbers represented by this binary-based surface were prime numbers, the most magical numbers in the world. In the world of mathematics, prime numbers are arrogant little princes. They are numbers that cannot be divided into smaller numbers. This gives them a sort of nobility in the cosmos, a singularity. They know no compromise of lesser parts. Mathematicians still compete to discover the next largest prime. Recently, the largest known prime number was the size of 10 to the 83rd power.
Many of us think that we're looking at a pure and very simple message, too elegant for primitive man. Was this a message from a higher being? Is this evidence of the voice of God?
This simple mathematical proposition here is interesting because of the universal implications. However, the church would never recognize a thing like this. And if people indeed lived, 20,000 years ago, maybe so. What does it matter? What does it matter?
Meanwhile, at the Rocky Point Garden excavation, a new discovery. The partial remains of a chair had been previously found near the surface, but discarded as 20th century junk. It was an artifact from the 1950s, a metal and leather chair, once called the Wassily chair, by the designer Marcel Breuer, in honor of his pal, the painter Wassily Kandinsky.
Mr. Makarov, one of your paintings?
Yes, it's a work that I'm rather fond of. A good piece of abstract painting, don't you think?
It's remarkable. Certainly got a lot of color. No doubt about that. What does it represent?
Represent? Why, it doesn't represent anything. Why should it? It's a picture, an independent entity. There's no reason to imitate something else.
No, I suppose not. It's just that I'm sort of used to looking at pictures of people and objects,
Why?
Why? Well, it's, why?
It was irrelevant to the dig. What was interesting was below. A second chair, much older, was now revealed, deeper in the same excavation. This was also a false alarm. It was fashioned of oak, not a material expected to survive 20,000 years in the damp Camino Island soil. This chair was interesting to a different type of antiquarian. It was a simple armchair, once a rocker, manufactured by the Gustav Stickley Company in 1907. These pieces, in good condition, are very collectible to the owners of thousands of bungalows, made at the turn of the century in the Pacific Northwest. Was this older object, found deeper in the excavation, a sign of further and earlier artifacts yet to be unearthed?
This is the first known example of what had been theorized about for years, but never found. A chair shaft.
The excavation resumed with a renewed vigor. Something was waiting for them, much deeper and much more ancient. On the third day of digging, they found what they were looking for. 23 feet under the Camano Island surface rested a construction of iron and bronze and mastodon cuts. Covered in rust and scale from its 20,000-year internment under glacial chill.
This mastodon chair was the first object that suggested that this was more than a nomadic village discovered here on Camano Island. Metal was used here, metal that was extracted, concentrated, and manipulated, and it predated the Bronze Age by at least 5,000 years. Bronze Age tools have been known in Europe as far back as 14,000 BCE. But their tools were as primitive as can be. This was much older and more than a primitive implement.
Certainly there was more to the civilization than first met the eye.
We think there might have been people from taller cultures that came, and this sort of could accommodate. But we don't have any grease left to stick it in. It doesn't work very well, but it's old.
Faced with evidence of a more advanced culture than anyone expected, mathematicians and theorists took a closer look at the symbols on the other coded vessels. Of particular interest were the 3 tall urns bearing symbols. What were these strange markings trying to tell us? It was obvious that there was a numerical base to these forms. Besides the obvious numeral one, we can easily see number references in the shape. The symbol for the number 2. The points on corners are clues, as is the obvious sequence carved on this schoolhouse vessel. Until you reach the last 6 symbols. Instead of double digits when we reach the numbers 10 through 15, the schoolhouse pot suggests single digits until the 16th number.
Using this method, we can easily determine the identities of the unknown icons. The number 16 is curiously represented by the familiar number 10. What we have here, then, is a system of number counting based on the number 16.
There's nothing sacred about the decimal system that we use on most of the planet today. The decimal system is an Arabic invention, showing up around 7,000 years ago. It's handier than most counting systems because the number of fingers on both hands is also 10. Ironically, contemporary software designers use a base 16 system every day. It's called hexadecimal. It leaves them a lot cleaner in information retrieval calculations, which are based on 16s and 32s and other binary byproducts. A base 16 math system would have worked out just fine in an older culture if you had a counting device. You could figure out your change at the corner market just as easily with 16 numbers as you could with 10.
Frankly, my preference would be 5. I can go with 7. Anything beyond that is superfluous within the sort of reference to numerology and mythic numerology in particular. I think it's, but one can't criticize or condemn others, most particularly in this case ancient civilizations. They had their own particular demands and ideas and conventions and historical precedences and precedencies.
Remnants of both an addition device and a subtraction machine, which worked on the 16-base system, were found at the Rocky Point excavation. This is really a Paleolithic computer. It provides a wonderful window into this remarkable culture. It proves the existence of negative numbers. Primitive people have always feared negative numbers. By doing simple arithmetic exercises with this prehistoric subtracting machine, it is easy to prove the existence visually of numbers like -3, which are impossible to see, but with a device like this, easy to understand.
Proving that a universe of negative numbers existed might not have been a politically correct decision for the maker of this pot. Particularly during the dark years when conservatism reigned, life in early Camino Island times could have been filled with danger if you knew too much math.
Many times in human history, too much knowledge was a dangerous thing to possess. A recent example is in an area called Cambodia, where a very powerful yet insecure leader named Pol Pot ordered the systematic killing of every intelligent person in the country. For 10 years, the act of owning a pair of eyeglasses was enough for a death sentence.
At the 5-foot level, volunteers at the Rocky Point garden site began to find terracotta figurines. A total of 47 figurines emerged, as well as a rusted metal slab weighing over 300 pounds.
Small effigies seem to be common to all primitive cultures. The famous Venus of Willendorf was found in present-day Romania. It was one of a group of figurines similar to the Camino cluster. Women seem to be the main subject with these first figural artifacts, which are found in sites all over the world dating back to 50,000 years ago. To simple cultures, the birth of a child was treated as a miracle, which of course it is. Nearly every Paleolithic image unearthed, regardless of the culture, reflects this. The Camino Venuses were no exception. It's clear that women were worshipped and wandered about on these shores as well.
When placed in a seated fashion on the bronze and iron platform, a curious and mystical tableau began to take form. It told the story of a ritual. It was a story as old as time or mankind itself. A story of sacrifice and skill. And leadership and redemption. It suggested an annual contest which happened every spring.
Baseball goes a lot further back than Abner Doubleday. All the early cultures in North and South America enjoyed some kind of spectator sports. The Mesoamericas was a land of plenty, with lots of free time for its people.
In 1990, a lone man-made mound in the region of Chiapas, Mexico, was investigated by researchers from a Canadian university. Instead of housing or temples, they discovered clay benches and a playing alley as long as a modern football field. twice the size of previously known Mayan ball courts, built thousands of years later.
From what we can determine, the object was to put a leather ball like this through a stone circle high upon a wall without using your hands. So, this ancient sporting event is sort of the combined father of basketball and soccer. We estimate this early stadium to be over 5,400 years old. We believe that soccer's popularity in Mexico today to be directly related to this ancient sport.
The Camano Island model dates to much earlier times. It suggests a different kind of contest and a different set of goals.
The similarities are very significant. In both scenarios, to the best of our knowledge, the losing manager lost his head, not just his job. Both contests began, or ended, with a warm-up exercise in a pen filled with bulls. In both contests, theory suggests that the scoring player was rewarded with all the jewelry and clothing that the spectators were wearing. Friends of the winning player, in Mexico at least, were expected to chase down the fans after the game for their share of the booty.
Is baseball more accepted by American fans than soccer because of these early geographic clues? Does the fact that the Venus figures discovered are already without clothing suggest that they're looking at the second game of a Paleolithic doubleheader? The losing coaches apparently thought so. No firm conclusions can be drawn, but we still observe similar behavior today. Other decorative vessels in this historic find suggest a vibrant culture, filled with sophisticated ideas and political structures. Where did these people come from? And why did they disappear without a trace?
A lot was learned about this culture when these two urns were assembled and examined. Now, this urn has indications that any Northwest navigator would recognize. It's a map. It's a crude but remarkably accurate map of the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the islands of Puget Sound.
The known world was smaller then. It stretched from Camano Island to present-day Friday Harbor. The end of the known world began near Port Angeles, Washington, an opinion still widely held there today.
And this is also a map. It tells us about a natural disaster, an event which spelled the doom of a civilization, an event which caused these stories to be told and then found 20,000 years later in our time.
Everyone has heard of the Ice Age, but few people understand what happened here in the Northwest over the last 250,000 years. People think of the Ice Age as a big slab of North Polar ice, which spread southward in all directions and scraped away everything in sight for thousands of square miles and then melted back to the smaller ice cap that we have today. That's correct as far as it goes. But do you know that there were actually 4 recent ice ages, one right after another? We're right now still in the middle of a cycle of ice ages. We just happen to be living in one of its warm spells. In 1986, a study of vegetation and soils around the Great Lakes revealed that every 20,000 years for the past 250,000, another big buildup of ice, at least 1 mile deep, would slowly but relentlessly flow southward and reach into what we now know as Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Just as regularly, a warm spell of 20,000 years would hold sway, and the ice would melt and retreat again to the north. Each time, evidence shows proof of brand new forests and new soil built upon the rocky, ice-scoured hardpan and granite. 20,000 years is a long time for life to return to normal. Plenty of time.
20,000 years is plenty of time for a band of polar nomads, nomads of an earlier ice age, to build a culture. Settled into the river bend area now called Mount Vernon, there they built a surprising and brilliant society. A renaissance of paleontological thought on that fertile alluvial plain. Just in time to see yet another ice sheet come down and scrape it back to bedrock, leaving no traces but the stories told by descendants of the rocky spine of Camano Island. Stories of the past, of days gone by. The pots tell us stories about weddings and dances and medicine men. We see tales of morality or the lack of it.
Vielleicht, maybe it is possible, but we here in Europe have never seen this sort of thing where the male member is inserted in combination with the female. It's all in any sense as you see here. Can you see this? Yeah. It's you see, it's the male and the female is all in unified and also in part. This is very, very curious. And so finally, the receptacle we have here is common, yeah. So, however, the top, in analysis we find some of my compatriots and I, this top is very strange. I have not seen this in the nature. It's quite nature, yeah, is frankly is upsetting.
Stories of everyday life. Their natural calamities. And man-made disasters.
How could a group of people this advanced simply disappear? It just doesn't make any sense. The archaeological record in North and South America is devoid of evidence of any high technology anywhere until fairly recent times. What happened to these people 20,000 years earlier? Did they just drop off the face of the earth? We do know that 20,000 years ago, the ice sheet advanced southward once again and scraped this region clean down to the bedrock, and then melted back again, leaving Camano Island as its calling card. But the intellect and the elegance, and the advances in math and metallurgy, the creating and the innovation, how could that just disappear? And the answer was found right here on the surface of pot 36525 LT. Clearly visible is a well-trained army forming its ranks at the north end of what is certainly Camano Island. The message on the pot is clear. Pot number 36525 LT suggests that a great army was assembled and went marching off to some conflict, to the south. We believe it was an uprising by social, religious, and political conservatives. There is ample evidence that these early subcultures clashed and disagreed on many issues. Religious fundamentalism, political disagreements, and finally proof of sweeping censorship and repression.
One of the last major artifacts found on Camano Island was a huge glass column, broken of course, but restorable. On its surface, the team could see raised symbols similar to the math system previously found. But instead of 16 symbols, the obelisk displayed just 10, with evidence of considerable obliteration on the top section.
The conclusions are easy to draw. Examine the number 16 system. Of the lower symbols comprising 1 through 10, we find 3 biologically based symbols. 2 eyes for the number 2. A hand with fingers for the number 5. And the kitty cat for the number 9. When we interpret the glyphs, which represent the numbers 10 through 15, we discover the source of an age-old dispute. Those upper numbers are depicted as sexual organs, rude body parts, and flatulism references.
Das ist auch, nein, wir haben hier more very interesting, this part here. This is interior, yeah? It's going inside, we think. Now what kind of mind does these people have with this concentration, with the female, obviously, elemental, aperture. Was denken diese people?
The censoring of the number system implies that a society was willing to change their beliefs in science, math, and technology to satisfy their political and religious views. The education system in Kansas recently went through such a change in values.
The only good, probably, that came out of this repression was the decimal system.
A culture grows, prospers, it declines, and a dark age leads into the future as the past is scraped and flattened by the spreading ice cap. But where did the people go?
The Camano Island excavation had one more treasure to reveal that would answer this question and pose a number of new questions for today. The piece of glass almost escaped detection. A pile of neighborhood trash disguised a portion of the slab uncovered by a heavy winter storm. It was the tip of an iceberg, which led to another cache of sporting figures and Venuses and a much more elaborate stadium, and with it a link to the present. It was a find which astonished even the artifact-hardened Camano Island excavation team. In the end, 2 bronze models of sports arenas were uncovered, along with 2 slabs of primitive cast glass and numerous figurines in bronze, clay, and amazingly glass. Most incredible of all was a framework of metal enclosing a series of huge hinges, which, when placed on top of the architectural model, appeared to suggest a roof. More than that, a retractable roof, that was planned for a structure 35,000 years ago.
The ancient past is littered with examples of sports stadiums. A few even sported some protection from the weather.
And here, it would have been about 25 meters thick. And the whole thing, to keep that semicircle going, would have been big enough to hold St. Paul's Cathedral inside.
But none of them worked like this.
Huge columns provided a viewing platform and shelter for the early Mount Vernon elite. They would travel across the lozenge-shaped field, pulling the hinged roof across the length of the stadium. It was designed, even then, to protect the average viewer, leaving the very poor and rowdy fans exposed. A remarkable suggestion even for the present day.
The discovery of hockey-type activity at the Camano Island site was an important link to many unsolved historical puzzles in more recent Northwest history. They all involve a legend. Lewis and Clark were the first Europeans to encounter this story in 1806 on their discovery adventure across the Pacific Northwest. And now I will read from their journal. November 12th, 1803. Today, on the 5th day, at the Stevens Pass camp, Sacagawea returned. She has news of a band of women who had been sighted recently by the Skykomish people. She tells me that contact with this group is exceedingly infrequent. The women are known to favor a sport which, when described, appears to be similar to lacrosse. November 15th, 1803. We've exited the mountains and headed toward a thickly forested shoreline, heavy-hearted at not having met the female sporting tribe. Our loins, heavy from the absence of the fair sex on our journey, had quickened as of late at the thought of such a meeting. The campfire conversations lately have turned again to sheep, which, and here's the famous missing page that Lewis and Clark never wanted anyone to really see. That reference to the women in the mountains remained the only one recorded in the 19th century. In the 20th century, as populations grew, more encounters with this band were inevitable. To the popular Cascade Mountain photographer, Asho Curtis, at the turn of the century, this mythical group became an obsession. In his later years, he confided to his friends, his brilliant career as a photographer in the North Cascades was spent in a futile attempt to find and photograph this elusive band in their domain. Curtis was crushed when he heard that a relative stranger to the Northwest, L.G. Linkletter, had succeeded in photographing some of this mythical band of women on Paradise Glacier, high on the side of 14,223-foot Mount Rainier.
Is there a connection between the female hockey-playing figurines carved at the end of the last ice age and discovered on Camano Island and these mythical mystery women? Although reported sightings are numerous in the 20th century, hard evidence is rare. In 1931, the Bishop of Seattle snapped this view during a rather adventurous religious retreat with the other West Coast bishops on the side of Mount Rainier near a present-day meadow they call Camp Muir. This hazy image stood as the only recent documentation of the hockey women myth. A mining engineer caught this footage in 1983 from a small plane flying toward a conference in Lake Chelan, but nothing came of it. The band of women remained a 20th century rumor, the Pacific Northwest coast version of an urban legend, until the capture of a wanted Norwegian fugitive added new light on a 1,000-year-old myth. The mountains of the Pacific Northwest have long been a haven for odd characters, unreasonable people, and those who had no use for neighbors. The little town of Darrington, nestled in a steep-walled cul-de-sac in the North Cascades, was such a place. It came into regional prominence last summer with the capture of its most elusive residents, a fugitive hermit we'll call Stan. In 15 years, living on the run from cabin to cache, high in the North Cascades, Stan reported many encounters with the mystery woman myth. Only once did he meet them face to face. Now in the state penitentiary, Stan was eager to tell his story.
It was very difficult in the mountains up there. Crime is not a word you think about in a high altitude. The mountains, they're beautiful, but they have no soul. Until that night when I saw the women. Many times, in the highest and most difficult terrain, I'd seen their marks in the snow. I knew their scat. They pissed like women, you know, straight down, no penmanship. But I never knew their source until one moonlit evening near the mountain they call Glacier Peak. I had walked to a crest and was resting when I saw them. They were marching single file along a mountain ridge. I counted 7 of them. The moon was full. I watched them play. I hid behind the crest and I watched them as if it were the hour of noon. They played with a fierceness that I have never seen, even in the Stalin years, even in the Viking times. They played like Russians. Yet they looked like angels. I was spellbound. It was like they moved in a silent ballet. I watched an unseen artist's hand create an alphabet of symbols with their bodies. They used their limbs and trunks together and sent a message. to the sky. When I woke up, they were gone. The events of the rest of the evening are difficult to recall. I remember something about being discovered. Then something wonderful. But I don't remember exactly what. The next day, I felt odd, but well all day, although a little sleepy, and I felt the curious urge to smoke a cigarette.
Have we seen these symbols before in the ancient recounting of the Mount Vernon culture? Many places in the New World are known for strange symbols not yet explained.
They're barely one leg up on a trophy right now. That is, if I'm any judge of form.
Some display messages aimed only at the sky. Did the Mount Vernon culture simply disappear? Or did the knowledge of these remarkable and creative people simply get scattered and simplified and carried to distant corners of the planet, where they found a reception free from fear and far from small-brained leaders who would dare to smother the human need for expression and censor the numbers of love.
Danke schön, gnädiger Fräulein, für diese. Aber dieser Schad, this scheiße Schad is that's what I think of your evidence for this. This is false, truly false. I cannot say more. Ja, Rolf, bitteschön. Kann mir hier zugehen. Ja, danke.